Tonight we're learning about a Tampa doctor and his very personal fight with an incurable disease. Dr. Vincent Tadone was forced to become an expert when his daughter was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease. Now, years later, the treatment protocol he developed is giving new hope to patients living with ALS. Our Gina Patishi taking action for your health, looking at how the treatment works. Gina?
Deanna Tadone Gage went on a run almost 8 years ago and noticed that she was having difficulty. Soon after, she learned of the diagnosis that would forever change her life. I spoke to Deanna and her father, who have teamed up to extend her life and help others fight the disease.
I said, you know, we're going to beat this.
The words Dr. Vincent Tadone told his daughter in 2007. Deanna Tadone Gage was an attorney, recently married and starting her life when she found out at 30 years old that she had ALS.
Without my father, I would not be sitting here talking to you today. He also gave me the hope to fuel my positive attitude.
Doctors gave her little hope, but she and her father decided to create their own, and that's how the Deanna protocol was born.
If on one hand we can give the cells energy, stop them from dying, and on the other hand we can neutralize what's killing the cells, we'll be pretty good. We'll be pretty good until they ever find a cure.
That's the heart of the treatment plan. It combines natural substances already found in the body that anyone can buy over the counter. According to Dr. Tadone, the medical substances included in the Deanna protocol are not only beneficial for people diagnosed with ALS, but can help those with traumatic brain injuries and brain tumors.
It started with helping my daughter, but I'm able to give back and help all these other people.
Deanna says although her diagnosis was scary in the beginning, she and her father want to help others win the fight.
I'm here to tell you that there is hope.
Tadone says that there are currently over 2,000 people around the world that have reached out to them about the Deanna protocol. If you would like more information about the free program, or if you're interested in helping the fight against ALS, you can head over to our website, which is abcactionnews.com, and click on the story links section. Live in the studio, Gina Patishi, ABC Action News.
News: getting diagnosed with ALS, commonly known as Lou Gehrig's disease, is sadly still terminal.
But a woman in Tampa Bay is finding a way to defy the odds. Spectrum News anchor Jeff Butera has her story.
Deanna Tadone is sitting next to the man she says saved her life, a man who also happens to be her dad.
Which one do we want to win?
Deanna does not mince words. Without him,
I want to be dead.
I won't mince words either. About 15 years ago, doctors told Deanna to go home and prepare to die. She had ALS, a neurodegenerative disease that weakens your muscles and to most in the medical community will ultimately take your life.
I told her I wasn't going to accept it.
Dad Vince Tadone is also Dr. Tadone, a retired orthopedic surgeon. But when Deanna was diagnosed, he threw himself into neurology, trying to find out what caused his daughter's disease.
We made a covenant. She would be the test case. I would do the research.
I don't think he slept. Maybe an hour here or there. There was non-stop.
And he dreamt big.
And we could eliminate all these diseases, where now all we do is we treat the symptoms and watch the patient progress to death.
Instead, Vince tried to focus on what triggers ALS and what might stunt its progress. I'm not going to bog you down in the medical vocabulary, but Vince believes that giving ALS patients like Deanna a mixture of substances called AAKG and GABA might eliminate their muscle symptoms and help their brains.
And it also improves cognition, and it slows progress of the disease because it keeps cells alive.
He calls his cocktail Deanna's protocol. He says in a test, all 41 patients on the protocol deteriorated slower than the average ALS patient. And Deanna, look at her.
Keep those elbows out.
Doing physical therapy 5 times a week, a trainer coming to her house twice a week. She's more than merely alive. Because of her dad, she'll tell you she's living, and that matters.
I am so blessed that he is my father has given me and others quality of life.
Jeff Butera, Spectrum News.
Dr. Dodone, I've got to say thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so interested in learning about your background and where you started working with the Deanna protocol and how this story really came out of your own story, really. I mean, it's your own daughter is Deanna, but how you've transitioned from a career of orthopedic surgery into what you thought was going to be a nice retirement, and then turned into coming out of retirement because you became this researcher, and now you've become this incredible expert in neurodegenerative diseases. And again, thank you for being here. But I can give a little bit about your background, but I want you to tell me your background.
I retired. I was chief of orthopedics at University Community Hospital, which is now Florida Hospital in the Advent system. I retired in 1997. My wife and I traveled extensively for 10 years. In 2007, my daughter Deanna complained of stumbling every time she walked. And she noticed that she saw me coming down a flight of stairs. And she said, "Dad, you came down those stairs. You didn't even look at the stairs." And I said, "Deanna, you don't look at the stairs." She didn't realize that she had to look at the stairs so that she wouldn't lose her balance. I checked her reflexes and they were abnormal. She was an attorney at the time and had just made partner in a local law firm. And one of the things that would happen that really scared me was if she would stumble, she would fall. But she lost the reflex ability to put her hands out to block the fall. So she would hit her head.
So all of this was prior, we're here talking about Deanna, all of this is prior to Deanna's diagnosis of ALS.
Yes.
So these are just the early signs of the early symptomatic observations that were taking place, but no one knew what it was at the time.
Exactly. So we started to bring her around to physicians, and a friend of mine, a neurologist in Tampa, did an EMG study on her, and the test, which basically shows action potentials in muscles, was very indicative of ALS. And he didn't really want to make that diagnosis, and so we went to Johns Hopkins. Yes, she has ALS. We went to the Mayo Clinic. Yes, she has ALS. And they gave her 2 to 5 years to live. Go home, get your affairs in order. And
So I have to interrupt you and ask this question. So here you are, an established physician who've retired from being the head of orthopedics at the hospital. You've worked with all these famous athletes. You've worked with all of these things. And now here you are as a father hearing a diagnosis of your own daughter. I mean, you've got these superpowers in the medical field with all these other people in the world, and now you've got a diagnosis of your daughter, which is something that you had no experience in. I have to imagine that just felt like such a helpless feeling, because here you are, this master of medicine, and now it hits home.
yeah, well, it was daunting. And it was just something that it was almost impossible for me to accept. I had one experience with ALS, and it happened to be just an observational experience where I saw a woman taking out of a wheelchair, and put into a chair that extended out from the car, and just watched her total inability to move. And then the chair picked her up and went in the car. And I said to myself, can you imagine? You still have a brain, you can still think, but your body doesn't function. You can't hold anything, you can't walk, you can't even sit up straight.
Being flashbacks of this moment when you hear that your daughter now has ALS.
Absolutely.
You're thinking back to this woman you saw completely debilitated in a van one day.
And I'm saying, is this going to be my daughter? And Deanna and I discussed it, and she says, Dad, I don't want to die. And I said, I don't want you to die. I said, look, if you'll be the test case, I'll do everything I can to research neurodegenerative diseases and see if I can find something that would work in helping you. She said, fine. So this was the covenant. And indeed, almost for 2 years, I injected her with substances. She took oral substances, intravenous substances, and to see if there was anything that might help her. During this period of time, her disease was progressing. I think it was about 2011 when I came across this product, alpha ketogluteric acid, which when I gave it to her, she said, Dad, I can carry a glass of water without spilling it now. And patients who have ALS have incessant muscle symptoms, twitching, fasciculations, so they're very uncomfortable. And the AKG suppressed those symptoms. She also had severe muscle cramps. And I spoke to her doctor at Johns Hopkins, and he said you can use gabapentin. I researched gabapentin. I saw it was GABA aminobutyric acid, which is the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter. And we put her on that. It was not supposed to be able to pass the blood-brain barrier, but she started taking it. She no longer had the cramps.
Now, I want to add, this is 4 years later. This
Yes.
is 2007 as a diagnosis, and you started work immediately, which is probably one of the most amazing parts I hear of this story, because being familiar with the story, she received the diagnosis, and you didn't wait a year, you didn't wait 2 years, you didn't, you jumped into action, like a heroic father would. But you jumped into action to start doing this, but it wasn't for 4 years that you really came across what started working. So 2 to 5 year diagnosis, that's her, you said you used the words, go home and get your affairs in order.
Yes.
She has 2 to 5 years to live. You started doing all of these things, desperately searching for something that would have an impact. And I would argue and say something was having an impact because she stayed alive all the way through 2011 when you came across some of these things. So her condition, she continued to generate. She continued to have cellular death. She continued to, become more symptomatic and more symptomatic as time played out. But 4 years, she was a patient zero to your research. That time had to seem like an eternity.
Well, it did, and once we started the Deanna protocol, which was the combination of AKG and GABA, and let me just say, that's the core Deanna protocol. But alpha ketogluteric acid is it's a bipolar acid. It's very strong. And we looked for something to neutralize it. And arginine is a bipolar base. And so arginine neutralized it. Plus there was an added benefit to arginine, which was basically it increased energy production in the mitochondria. It also lowered blood sugar. and caused vasodilation, which increased blood supply. So the Diana protocol was developed AAKG and GABA. And we started her on that. And I said, this is working for my daughter. Her cognition was improved, her muscle symptoms were suppressed, and the speed with which the disease was progressing was slowed down. And so that was 2011. We had a lot of patients who reported that it helped them also. They stated, you know, I can swallow, I couldn't swallow before. And I don't have the muscle symptoms. Some might say, well, it didn't really help the muscle symptoms. And I would tell them, okay, stop taking it for a few weeks and let me know how you do.
So I want to add in there, you used the word we had a lot of patients, but you weren't treating anybody.
No.
But my understanding is that because people knew Deanna and they knew her situation, and you'd been networking in this ALS community so deeply, that people saw what was happening with her and they started asking you questions, and what is she doing and what therapeutics are you using on her, and you started sharing this formula with people. So you weren't treating patients per se, but you were actually having other people experiment with it and collecting anecdotal support.
Exactly. I was not treating patients. In fact, the desire to get this word out, my family basically started a 501c3 not-for-profit corporation, winningthefight.org. The acronym is WFND, Winning the Fight Against Neurodegenerative Diseases. And this was to go online and have a site that we could direct people to and tell them the story about Diana. And what happened was, and I tried to promote this to neurologists, and they said, well, this is just anecdotal evidence, and we can't accept it. So then we decided to fund a research project at the University of South Florida. And we funded that project on ALS mice. That is, mice that were engineered mutationally to have ALS. And what we found was no other product had ever touched these mice or helped them. It slowed the disease progression, improved their muscle function, and improved their energy production, because they did metabolomic studies on the mice, which basically show what are the products, the catabolic products, breakdown products of energy production. And the mice that were on the DP, it was increased. Well, the people in academia, the neurologists, said to me, you can't transfer mice studies to humans. I said, all right. So to get the word out, we wrote the book, The Diana Protocol, Hope for ALS and Other Neurodegenerative Diseases. In the book, in the appendix, we document 40 patients who had ALS who took the Diana protocol. There is a functional rating scale, ALS-FRS, and usually ALS patients, their function will diminish by 1.5 to 2 points a month. Over a 6-month period, the patients that took the DP diminished by 1 or less a month. Those graphs are documented in the appendix of the book. It was published in 2015. Once again, in touch with neurologists at the universities, they asked me the question. Well, first they said, well, we understand that you're not in this to make money. I said, no. And they asked me the question, Well, who tested them and wrote down their functional rating scores? I said, the patients. They said, well, you need to have the neurologist do that. I said, if the neurologist won't prescribe the DP, they're not going to do the functional rating scoring. And by the way, the neurologists have the patients score themselves. Okay. So we weren't getting through. And I actually offered to fund clinical trials on the DP at Mass General, University of South Florida, and the Byrd Neurodegenerative Center. I was turned down at all three places. Then I found out that at the University of Central Florida, they had a program of nanotechnology. And what they do is they can take a cell from someone who has a neurodegenerative disease like ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or Alzheimer's disease. They can take that cell from the patient, take blood or a skin cell. In vitro, in the laboratory, they can downregulate that cell to a stem cell. It's called an induced pluripotent stem cell, a very immature cell. Then they can apply nerve growth factors and make that cell a nerve cell. Well, lo and behold, that cell has the pathology for ALS, Alzheimer's disease, and the other neurodegenerative diseases. So they looked at the ALS nerve cell, and what did they see? Well, they looked and saw the nerve cell. Then they saw the axon, which is the extension from the nerve cell, to a synapse that connects to another nerve cell, or through a neuromuscular junction to connect to a muscle. And they saw in that axon the conduits that carry the signal to the other nerve cell or muscle. They're microtubules. They saw the microtubules develop swelling or varicosities. They also saw that the electrophysiological signaling was flat. When they added the DP, the swelling diminished, the electrophysiological signaling reappeared. In both ALS, no matter what gene mutation they used, okay, and not published yet. That study is published. It's a +1 published study. Alzheimer's disease, the same thing, plus that there was amyloid deposits in the extracellular space, and when the DP was added, these deposits were diminished.
So I want to get further into the science of amyloid deposits and the microtubules that leave, and we're going to get into tau energy and these types of things. But I want to take one quick step back with you and say, back to Deanna, 2007, she receives a diagnosis, and then you said that in 2015, you finally had gotten what you believed was the right balance of formula, the Deanna protocol, or as you call it, the DP.
Well, we documented what was happening in the laboratory, which we knew was happening clinically.
Understood, but I want to get to the point that she continued to degenerate, though, even up through that period.
Yes, so, at a slower rate.
Correct. So at a slower rate, it was able to arrest some of the symptoms from developing, and at a slower rate, her condition...
Instead of dying within 2 to 5 years, she was still living.
And then there was a point that you discovered that there might have been another underlying problem that is normal with people with ALS or other types of neurodegenerative diseases. And it involved a lab called IGeneX, I believe. Can you fill me in on what happened there?
Well, my contact with other physicians on the internet, this one very erudite physician said that neurodegenerative diseases, in specific ALS, is caused by a bacterial infection. The infection is Borrelia. Now, my knowledge of infectious diseases is minuscule as an orthopedic surgeon. So I had to start studying infectious diseases.
So for years you've gone from orthopedics into neurological disorders, and now you're becoming an infectious disease expert also.
Exactly. I wouldn't say expert, but I knowledge about this specific type of infection. Now understand that every ALS patient, when the diagnosis is made, is tested for Lyme disease, and Lyme disease is caused by Borrelia. And they're tested according to the CDC criteria. And every test is negative, because the tests are done at commercial laboratories. And commercial laboratories don't have the antigens capable of detecting the antibodies of the Borrelia bacteria. So this erudite friend of mine said, you have to have it tested at IGeneX. And we had it tested at IGeneX. And in 2015, we got the results back that she had a Borrelia infection. I still wasn't convinced. ALS has been around since 1939, Lou Gehrig. Billions of dollars have been spent on research to find the cause of it.
Right, and now you're sitting here with a solution.
And now I'm sitting here with a solution that it's an infectious disease. I was skeptical. But in October of 2015, my daughter developed spinal meningitis, severe. She couldn't put her chin to her chest without severe pain. We admitted her to the hospital. Discussion with the infectious disease expert. All the tests done at the hospital, MRI, CAT scan, cerebrospinal fluid, laboratory tests for bacteria, white blood cells, all the tests were negative. Oh, I'm talking to the infectious disease doc, and she's saying all the tests are negative. I said, yeah, my daughter is dying. I said, look, I have an outside laboratory that we tested her, and they tested positive for Borrelia. Let's put her on IV antibiotics. What have we got to lose? So the ID doc agreed with me. We put her on strong antibiotic, Rocephin, 2 grams every 24 hours. Her pain went away. She can now put her chin to her chest. She can lift her leg up. However, as the time elapsed from the dose, the pain started to come back. So we increased the dose to every 12 hours. Well, she has not had that pain since 2015.
It's so astounding.
And, based on that, we developed, myself and some other doctors, because these patients have to be placed on large doses of antibiotics. And the antibiotics not only kill the pathogens, they kill the normal commensal or symbiotic bacteria. So we did a pulsed method. We put them on large doses, high doses of antibiotics for 3 days. And we'd put them on probiotics and prebiotics for 7 days. So we'd kill everything and only replace good bacteria. And the lesson that I learned from the fact that my daughter went from 2007 to 2015, where cells continued to degenerate, losing function, was, what if we had known back in 2009 or 2007 that the cause was a bacterial infection and started the treatment then, she would not have lost all this function. So while you're treating the patient, it takes time to kill off the bacteria. So you're losing cells, you're losing function. Therefore, it's important to take the Deanna protocol at that time and during that period. Because what does it do? It makes the patient more comfortable, slows the progression of the disease so you retain more function. And in the end, if you lose that cell that controls that certain function, you don't know if you can get that function back.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, we have a two-prong approach here to dealing with this, and that is through your learnings and study. There's first, obviously, this Deanna protocol, the combination of things that you've put together in this formula it's not curing ALS, but it's managing symptoms, really.
Keeping cells alive.
Right. The Deanna protocol is keeping it alive. It's arresting some of the continued degeneration. But this other prong is that there is this bacterial issue that most people with ALS need to get treated for, but unfortunately it doesn't even show up on most, lab tests.
Most common lab tests, they're commercial laboratories.
Right. So at a commercial lab, it's just not specific enough to look for something like this, and that's why the use of IGeneX has been useful for you when you're talking to people who are suffering this way. So our recommendation, of course, would be if you're dealing with a person who's received an ALS or, for that matter, some other kind of neurological diagnosis, get tested. Get tested fast.
At a specialty laboratory.
A specialty lab. And again, IGeneX, and that information is available on the Deanna Protocol website, I believe. And then, the other thing is take the Deanna Protocol in the meanwhile, because this is keeping the cells alive while you fight the underlying issue. That
Correct.
You've got an invader in the body, so we need to keep the lights on, but we also need to fight the enemy that's already behind the gates. And that becomes kind of that two-pronged battle that needs to handle. One of the things I heard you say earlier in a conversation I had with you was that a lot of people want to take the Deanna protocol because that seems to be the easy thing to do, but they neglect the other side of it, which is this dealing with the Borrelia infection, that they want to deal with one and they don't deal with the other. Is that even effective?
Ultimately, they're going to die. And what we're trying to do is save their lives. And the longer they wait to deal with the infection, the more function they're going to lose. And the worse off their life is going to be.
Right.
There's another aspect to this. Is you might ask, well, how does somebody get a Borrelia infection? Or how does somebody get Lyme disease, which is a Borrelia infection? All right. The best example I have is my daughter. She went to Peru, Machu Picchu, in 2004. And she came back, and she was sick for a month. Not traveler's sickness, the diarrhea. I'm talking about fatigue, fog, brain fog, that kind of sickness. And her husband had frequent upper respiratory infections. He was a young, healthy guy. And in putting the pieces together, after they got married, they moved into a house, which right after Katrina, the house was totally renovated. And right after Katrina, we ran out of American drywall. So they got drywall from China. The drywall from China has a lot of toxins because it's mined. It's not gathered from a smelter in a cold factory or whatever. and then the dust is cleaned. It's mined. And a lot of toxins in that mined drywall. In fact, when you would walk into a house, there would sort of be a metallic type of odor. And all the copper fixtures and the back of the mirror turned black.
Interesting.
So it was very high in hydrogen sulfide. So my daughter lived in that house for 27 months. And what I opine is, she was infected with the Borrelia in Peru. Her immune system suppressed it. But then she lived in the house with all the toxins that suppressed her immune system. The Borrelia was able to flourish, kill cells, and her neurological condition became, in 2007, probably before 2007,
Right.
Okay, became obvious.
So in 2007, it became a functional issue. It started
Exactly.
to present, but it could have been minor even before that.
Certainly you had to have a certain number of cells killed to lose the function.
Right. So my question, in hearing all of that, so she goes to Peru, she comes back, she's living in a home that's got toxins and whatnot in it, which later was discovered. What I'm taking away from that, Dr. Tadone, and correct me if I'm wrong, is you don't know when you're going to be exposed to something that could cause this. That, you know, a lot of people go to Peru and don't come back with ALS. A lot of people have lived in homes with, you know, toxic drywall and never come up with ALS. And it could be any number of things. I mean, we hear about Lyme disease being a result of tick bites and those types of things. It's almost as if it doesn't matter what the circumstances were prior. You need tested.
The problem is we don't have very good tests. And the reason why is the Borrelia bacteria, the spirochete, when it's in your body for a period of time, it moves out of circulation and it moves into soft tissue, into ligaments and tendons. And then it'll form a cyst when there's an ambient it doesn't like. So you're not getting antibodies against that antigen, so it's not detectable.
Right. For an antibody test, for sure.
And so what this other doctor determined is, what we have to do is we have to treat the cyst to open it up. So you put the patient on a metronidazole, which is Flagyl or Tindamax, at the same time that they're on the IV antibiotics, or oral antibiotics if we're talking about a slower progressing disease. But we can get into that. And that opens up the cyst, okay? And now the antibodies can detect the antigen, and the what happens is the antibiotics kill the uncysted bacteria. The DNA is then picked up in circulation, and now we can test for it.
So I'm going to try to translate that to the layperson. It's the equivalent of needing to pull the scab off so that you can actually get to the infection beneath it.
We call it the pre-test. Mm-hmm. And actually what we do is we advise people to take a pre-test for 28 days, oral Ceftin or Zithromax, and oral Tindamax or Flagyl. And that at the end of that period, all right, then get tested at IGeneX. Now, let me say, if you have ALS, okay, I think you should go to IGeneX as soon as you can and not wait a month or so forth. Chances are if you have those kinds of symptoms, you're going to be able to detect the antibodies. I would start the Diana protocol immediately. Okay. I left something out. And what are the vectors for these bacteria? And it's not only Borrelia, but there's also Bartonella, Babesia, Ehrlichii, perhaps fungi, perhaps protozoa. You don't know what the vector has. And the vector is not just a tick. It could be a horsefly, could be a mosquito, could be lice, could be a sand flea. We don't know what all the vectors are. It's also transmitted, Borrelia is, and probably the others, sexually. And so it's transplacental also. So when you look at familial ALS, and so you say you got the mutated gene from the mother or the parent. Did you get the mutated gene, or did you get the Borrelia, which then caused the gene mutation?